is my radio.
Live news on Scouting since 2005.
I love this station.
They're always on.
I listen all the time.
Scouting Radio.
Guys, thank you very much for joining us, all the attendees. This is a webinar that we have been saying that we're going to do for about a week or two, having so many things that's happened in the past week or two with regards to Black Lives Matter. Yes, Black Lives do matter. We're not going to dispute that Black Lives Matter. What we are going to dispute is the allegations that have been made about the founder of Scouts, Robert Baden-Powell. You may have seen in the news, you may have seen on Scouting Radio, we've had several different news pieces from Sky News, BBC News, and of course even Chris and Matt, who are Rover Scouts with the Thane Rover Crew. I'm going to let you guys tell the story here, Chris and Matt, because you found out that there was rumours that Baden-Powell statue was going to be attacked as part of this statue toppling, and that you guys wanted to do something about it. Take up the story.
Yeah, well, I'll start it off and you can finish. It started off really, we were having a Thane crew meeting the night before the statue was to be moved. And we were all having a general chit chat. Rover, I can't exactly remember what it was because Matt noticed on the news that they were going to take down the statue, which really took over the meeting. And we were in despair really that they wanted to remove, the founder's statue, So we all had a bit of a, discussion over it, went to bed, and in the morning, it was first thing on the news that I turned on was they're getting ready to remove the statue. And it was like, well, should we go down and say, as the statue is going to be removed, we didn't think we had any power of actually stopping it, or we didn't go down for that reason. Anyway, we messaged Ken and I messaged a district commissioner and that, and said that we were actually just going to pay a visit really to say goodbye to the statue, because we had no idea whether it would ever go back. We didn't want it removed, but we thought that the decision had already been made and it was going. And really at the time, we would rather have said, we would rather it be protected than being put in some box somewhere in the council offices and never put back. Mm-hmm. So we decided to take the road trip, and during the road trip we obviously were listening to the radio and stuff like that, and we thought, oh, it sounds like it might be quite busy. But when we got there, I drove too far and actually came back and saw that there were no scouts there at all, which was quite no scouts in uniform anyway, I would say. Mm-hmm. We parked up, and as we walked across from the car park and hit the main road, the entire crowd, which there was quite a lot, all started cheering and clapping us, which wasn't what we were expecting, as you can imagine. And we walked over, and then all the press were there. And it was quite daunting to have so many press literally jumping at you telling them to keep away from you for 2 meters at least. Yes, and they all wanted to talk to us of why we were there and stuff like that. So, do you want to carry on?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, my personal reasons going down wasn't to say goodbye to the statue, as you said. It's to be a voice of independent Rover crews, really. Not necessarily just Thane, but our own crew, Sir Tasker Watkins' own, because we knew there wouldn't be any representatives there for us. So I wanted to go speak my opinion, not to necessarily not be a protester or however some people may call us. I just wanted to be a voice of reason, saying, look, if the statue is moved, it's better to do it temporarily than see it at the bottom of the harbour because of some other protesters. But apparently our voices got heard a bit more than we anticipated, really.
Yeah,
being in the news and whatnot.
Yeah, well, we have to remind those listening and the attendees now, just to give some housekeeping rules. I know I sort of jumped into the webinar. If you want to ask any questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to anyone that's attending. There's also a chat box that you can chat to us. Feel free to throw in any questions throughout the program. We're going to be addressing all issues. If we don't address the question, listeners, we will address it by email at any stage whatsoever. Online also, as well as Chris and Matt, we have Colin Walker, Scout historian, Paul Moynihan, who has it was a Scout archivist for the Scout Association as well. And of course, myself, Justin Dawson, online. Matt and Chris, you travelled down from Wales. Like, how long was this distance? How many miles and how many hours did it take to get down?
Well, I think it was 183 miles one way, so quite a lot both ways.
It didn't really matter to us, the distance, to be honest, all the time, really.
But I think it took about 2.5 hours with traffic, really.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. But
Depending on how fast you drive.
we have to tell all our listeners that you guys have become the face of global scouting to say, hold on a minute, let's be the voice of reason here. Why are you trying to take out this statue? I know there was soldiers there on the day, former scouts and residents of the Poole area that all stood and said, including, I think, a 70 or 80-year-old man who said, you can fight me first before taking away this.
Yeah.
Len, he was a wonderful chap. We were speaking to him about half hour before he started waving his sticks around and saying, let's get through me first. He's a lovely chap.
So when did you know afterwards that now's the time to just, okay, we've made our point, we're going to go home? Or did you have any temptation to say, we might stay here until we hear elsewise?
We actually wondered, we were actually tempted to see if the island was open or not, to actually nip across, we were within the area really, but obviously it was still shut. I'm sure if we got a dinghy, we could have gone across, but got to draw the line somewhere. But we, as you said, we did, initially, literally, we split up slightly, and we had different members of the paparazzi, if you like, talking to us, the BBC, Sky, local newspapers. There was obviously local people as well were adamant that the statue was not going anywhere, which I can understand why. There's millions of people all over the world go to sit with Baden-Powell to look over to Brownsea Island, and it's like you remove that statue from there, and locals were saying it will never go back.
It's quite a landmark on Poole Harbour, really, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It overlooks Brownsea Island, the start of the beginning of scouting, really.
And I think anyone that travels there, any scout group internationally, they all put their neckers around Baden-Powell. If they're not going over, if they can't get a boat trip over to Poole that day, at least they've seen some type of statue that represents the foundation of scouting in Poole area. We're getting great responses here, listeners. There's people in from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I just want to read this out. I'm a scout and also a Boys Brigade officer in Malaysia. More than a decade ago, I read Colin Walker's article about the Boys Brigade on the Scouting Milestones page, and I'm really glad to be able to join this webinar and hear him in person. What a lovely comment. I think that's a great, guys, stay on the line with us. I think it's a great opportunity to bring in Colin. Hello, Colin, how are you?
Hello, Justin. We're fine.
Well, Colin, I'm going to take this up with you then as well, that the next step of this was the fact that why all this was happening was about Black Lives Matter. There was protesters that were toppling statues across England. And then we also found out that a local former politician by the name of Connie Drew was making terrible allegations about what Baden-Powell had done in the past. I think you can put it really to bed there, Colin, can't you?
Well, yes. I've never had the opportunity of meeting Miss Drew, although I've tried to correspond to her, and I know, Justin, that you've invited her on this programme many times. She's a part of the Topple the Statue, Topple the Racist group, and she has appeared on the Jeremy Vine show. Jeremy Vine asked her what she knew about Baden-Powell, and she said, not a lot. I went on to Google, and the four basic allegations that she was making, let's see, there was racism, there was homophobia, and there was pro-Nazi and pro-Mussolini. And so I thought to myself, well, if she's got that from the internet, I think I know where it will have come from. The Topple the Statues, Topple the Racist campaign in their webpage says that they were trying to promote a debate. And Connie Drew on Jeremy Vine said the whole purpose was to promote a debate. So as you will know, for several days running on Facebook, I challenged Miss Drew to a debate, and I know you invited her here, and she's not here.
Now, we must make that very clear. We traced up Connie for Mrs. Drew for at least a week, offered her on several occasions. She's had no response whatsoever to social media, to emails. Unfortunately, we don't have a phone number for her, but we've contacted her former political party and everything, and we've had no response whatsoever from Connie. So it's
I'll just finish up there, Justin. It's not my purpose. Scouting is a non-political organisation.
Exactly.
It's not my purpose to personalise this. Our purpose tonight is to examine these slurs and to give them a factual rebuttal.
Now, before we go on, we must mention that with the help of Thane Rover Crew, you have come out with a document called Robert Baden-Powell, Allegations and Truth. I have it there in my hands, holding it up to camera. That will be made available afterwards on the Scouting Radio website as well. And for any of the attendees that want to get their hands on a copy of that, we can also send it through to you afterwards. Again, if you have any questions, you can throw them into the question and answers box. And actually, a message from Alan Shrives says to all panelists, this is from Tim Kidd and Matt Hyde said, but it's right that we make time to listen, educate ourselves and reflect on history, acknowledging where there are times when views and actions from the past do not match the values we live by today. It is also right that we do not make accusations or form any conclusions without the facts. These are about the foundations and the open and honest debate about our society's past and future. Now, we'll stop there. That's the quote. And Alan says maybe you could help Tim and Matt by sending some fully referenced material, which can be published on the Scout Association website. Well, you know what?
They are on their way, Justin.
They are on their way. Okay, I'm going to also bring in our other panelists here. Paul Moynihan, you have been an archivist, former archivist of Scout Association, and written some books. I must try and I don't think that's many books as Colin has written on the back of Scouting, Paul, but you've written some books as well. So welcome along to Scouting Radio, and tell us a bit about your background as an archivist for Scout Association.
Well, I was the association's archivist from 1993 through to 2008, when I moved on for a variety of reasons. But actually, one of the last things I did in my capacity as archivist was to go down to Poole and to attend the unveiling of that statue on the quayside. Okay. So I've got a personal interest in that statue remaining there. I gave a keynote talk later that evening as a result of the statue unveiling to a large number of people in the Poole Waterfront Museum. So it was quite an achievement to get that statue there in the first place. It took a lot of effort on the part of many, many local people to raise the money and seek the appropriate planning permissions from the council. I was particularly interested to see the number of local people who were vehement in their support of that statue remaining. Quite remarkable. It obviously touches a nerve there. The local people of Poole appreciate the presence of that statue.
Well, and where we are now with that statue, for our international listeners, is the statue has been boarded up. It's still there. Lucky enough, we don't have to have former soldiers camping out overnight and residents standing by the statue, but it is boarded up. Unfortunately, though, and it hasn't made much. Correct me if I'm wrong. It didn't really make even English media. It didn't make any Irish media, but it made media in Portugal, where a local scout group who had a statue of Baden-Powell was beheaded in Portugal about 3 days to a week afterwards, which we just think is absolutely disgraceful. Now, we want to also tell our listeners that Karuna Badges, who supply Scouting Radio with our Scouting Radio badge, they have made a badge on Baden-Powell statue all proceeds will go towards rebuilding that statue, which was funded by a local scout group in Portugal. Again, we were trying to get our hands on someone to speak from Scouts Association of Portugal. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we weren't able to get anyone on. Hopefully in the future we will. But this just sells the message that this statue toppling has taken a global effect. We had one person send us an email pre this webinar to say, what's the status of the statues that's at Baden-Powell House? Well, I guess in the statues at Baden-Powell House and the statues at Gilwell haven't been affected at all. Am I right?
As far as I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it comes down to the fact, before we even go on and talk about the facts and the truth, there are so many statues of Baden-Powell, not just in England, but globally. And these false allegations can have a rippling effect to destroy the great image that Scouting has globally. We are the largest peace movement in the world. Now, with that in mind, let's get to some of the allegations that were made against Baden-Powell. First of all, Colin, Baden-Powell was a Nazi sympathizer. True or false?
Absolutely and utterly false, Justin. I think Chris Hitchens, as I said, he was the originator of that. And it's interesting, the language that he was couched in. It said Baden-Powell met Nazi, high-ranking Nazi. The high-ranking Nazi was Ribbentrop, who was the German ambassador in London, I think between 1937 and 1938. And Baden-Powell was a very important man at the time. And of course, he got invited to all sorts of state functions, as did all the ambassadors. We were not at war with Germany. There was a lot of tension between the two countries, and we were building up to war, but we were not at war. And so at a state function, the ambassadors would be invited, and Baden-Powell, as the leader of the biggest youth movement in Britain, would be invited. And there was an occasion where they sat together. Now, afterwards, Ribbentrop wrote Baden-Powell a letter. Now, Ribbentrop was a very cultural man. That's not meant to be an excuse for anything. It's just a fact. And Baden-Powell was a very well-mannered man. In fact, I've got a letter from Baden-Powell written to the commanding officer of the forces outside Mafeking. And at the end of this letter, Baden-Powell writes, "I am, sir, your most obedient servant," which shows just how polite he was. So Ribbentrop wrote Baden-Powell a letter, and in it he said that it would be a good idea if the Hitler Youth movement and the Scout movement were to work closely together. Now, that was never destined for success, because you have to remember that Hitler not only banned Scouting in 1935 when he instituted the Hitler Youth, he imprisoned Scouters who persisted in carrying on Scouting. So it wasn't likely. However, Baden-Powell courteously replied to Ribbentrop. And in his reply, which I have seen, he says, yes, it would be a good idea for the youth of the world to work together to avoid peace. Now, at that time, everybody in Britain was working to try to assure that we didn't have a repeat of the First World War. Baden-Powell did not categorically arrange meetings. This man, Chris Hitchens, said if it was not for the Second World War intervening, Baden-Powell would have gone to see Hitler in Germany. Really? He was 81 years old, sick, gone to Kenya on health grounds, and he died in 1941. He was not going, believe me, he was not going to Germany. So
you really did answer my question there, Colin. When did he go to Kenya? So he was in Kenya at that stage.
He was in Kenya from 1938. Okay. Yeah. So and he was a sick man, and he left public life, and he was basically dying. So Christopher Hitchens was wrong on that count, and he was wrong on all counts. I could spend the rest of the program going on about this particular issue, but Baden-Powell did not institute any camps. He didn't enter into any further conversation. He just said it would be a good idea if the youth of the world met together to work for world peace. Other than that, he would say repeatedly on any number of occasions, he said, scouts who camp together are less likely to shoot each other. Well,
that's true. Look, and that is very that's a quote from Baden-Powell. Did he? Baden-Powell liked reading Hitler's book of Mein Kampf. True or false?
Yes. Yeah, well, Paul is the person to answer this question because he's got.
Yes, Paul, please come in here and tell us about.
Be delighted. Well, yeah, Baden-Powell did read Mein Kampf. Yes, he had his own copy. But if you look at in his own diary on the 6th of October, I think it is 1939. So 1939, note the date, and he's living in Kenya. Laid up all day, he writes, read Mein Kampf, a wonderful book with good ideas on education, health, propaganda and organization, etc. But then, so you could take that sentence out of context and think, oh yes, Baden-Powell likes Hitler. But Bepe continues in his diary and writes, and ideals which Hitler himself does not practice.
Exactly. So I think you have to look at the motivation of the people that have cut halfway through a sentence and omitted the last part of the sentence.
Yeah.
Why would they do that? They did that in order to pick the bit which somebody would latch on and think, yeah, there's the evidence we're looking for, without writing down the qualifying clause, which is a part of the same sentence that says, yeah, Hitler might have written all this, but he'd no intention whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, there we are.
I just got an email in, and one that we have addressed before on Scouting Radio. And it's a genuine question, and thank you to this listener for sending it in, which was, why do I see a lot of Nazi symbology with Scouting? And of course, it's not actually the Nazi swastika, because the swastika was the good luck symbol turned or reversed.
Correct. Correct. Even this day in India, and I've been not too long ago, it seems that nearly every vehicle has got a swasti, which was the word swastika was taken from, which was the good luck symbol from one of the Indian gods. And this good luck symbol was prevalent worldwide right up until the 30s. And Baden-Powell had a good friend, Rudyard Kipling. And Rudyard Kipling was brought up in India, and in Rudyard Kipling's book, you will find much use of the international good luck sign, the swasti. So Baden-Powell adopted this, and in Scouting, we had a Medal of Merit with a swastika, and we had thanks badges in brass and in silver, in gold, that individual scouts or scout groups could give to people who would help them. This was up till 1935. When Hitler instituted a competition to design the badge for the Nazi Socialist Party, and a dentist won this, and it was the swastika. But Hitler called it the forward-facing wheel of prosperity. And at that time, the Scout Association rescinded these things and said, scouters who have been awarded these things could send them back, and the Medal of Merit was replaced by a single Scout salute. And so, yes, along with the rest of the world, I've got a good collection of postcards and all sorts of other ephemera where the swastika pre-1935 was an international good luck symbol. It's found in most ancient cultures in their designs in mosaics. It's found on a bishop's cope in Winchester.
It was even on Coca-Cola bottles as a good luck symbol.
Yeah, on Coca-Cola bottles. But once Baden-Powell had got wind that it was being used as the symbol of Nazism, then it was replaced in all cases in Scouting.
ASAP.
Now, I must actually remind our listeners that why do we have this type of panel on? Why do we have Colin and Paul on? Well, Colin, Paul has had the books as an archivist, but you are the only person that we can say we know of that has actually transcribed all of Baden-Powell's diaries and has it on the computer that he's talking to us at the moment, listeners. So if you have any questions whatsoever about Baden-Powell, the Q&A box is open in this webinar. And also, if we don't address the question, you can email scoutingradio, studio@scoutingradio.com. We'll put you in touch with Colin, no problem at all. We have this allegations and truth documents that we will send to anyone, or if you have any further questions about scouting. Rover scouting is, of course, Colin's favourite subject as well. And of course, Colin, let's just dive into that a bit when we talk about Rover Scouts, because we have several Rover Scouts in this meeting today. Rover Scouts was founded during the war times as well. So
not quite, Justin.
Oh, not quite. Okay, I'm both Justin.
Rover Scouting was it would be true to say that Rover Scouting was founded because of war.
Okay.
Because the Scouts who joined the Scout movement in 1908 were old enough to volunteer in 1914.
Mm.
So lots of people who had had several years of service as a Scout went to the front. Unfortunately, about a third of them didn't return. A third of Brownsea boys and a third of the Humsoft boys did not return. But when they were due to return, it was quite obvious that the Scout movement, who hadn't got anything in place for older boys, had got to do something. So it was decided that they would start an organisation for older boys returning from the front. I mean, the word boys is ridiculous. These men they were, had been up to their neck in blood and guts, haven't they?
Mm.
So the hierarchy of the Scout Association decided a good idea to form a senior section called Senior Scouts. The men who returned said, we are not senior anything and we want to be called Rovers. And they got the way. And the motto of the Rovers was service. But if I can just elaborate on what you were very kindly saying about me earlier, because I think it is pertinent. I have transcribed, and the only person so to be allowed by the Boy Scouts of America, because they have Baden-Powell's lifetime's diaries.
Of course,
I have transcribed his diaries. I've transcribed every known letter, and there are hundreds. I have read all of his books, and the purpose of saying this to you, Justin, is despite the oft-said thing that Baden-Powell was a man of his time, and therefore some of the evils that was norms in society at that time were bound to be visited on him, Baden-Powell, wrote as many books as Dickens. He wrote more articles than Dickens. And I have had the pleasure of reading most of them. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, you show me a passage where Baden-Powell is being openly racist, openly pro-Hitler, openly pro-Mussolini, openly homophobic, but we will come on to that one in a minute, yes, because there is a document we want to talk about, and it will be something new to me. So that's the challenge. The second half of his life, from 1908, he put into practice principles of equality and inclusivity. And in his very first camp on Brownsea that we were talking about just a few moments ago, across the waters from Poole, what did he do? He had a great social experiment that no other Victorian Edwardian had ever held. He got together the children from millionaires, from lords, and from what he called normal town boys. And he wrote, I mixed them up like plums in a pudding. They slept in the same tents. This was equality. This is what the people who want to see justice in the world, this is what they want to see. Inclusivity and equality. And here you have a man who's been doing this since 1908, who's being hoisted on a petard of what the whole British Empire is guilty of. We don't deny it. It's there. It's not something always that we can be proud of, but it cannot be visited on the shoulders of one man who can be made accountable for the sins of empire. When we look at his record, show me anything since 1907 where Baden-Powell is trying to lead young people astray. Not a bit of it. I think later on we'll come into some more positive things that he actually did stand for.
Well, this is the allegation, and the allegations come on both levels. I'm going to address the one that has been made many years ago, and I think Paul will probably have a lot to say about this as well as a Scout archivist. Baden-Powell was a repressed homosexual, and that came out way back when his biography came out. Paul, I'm going to bring you in first. Truth or fiction?
Fiction, complete and utter. The Baden-Powell's biographer, Tim Geel, a nice guy, Tim. I know Tim. I think misinterpreted certain bits, certain documents, certain things that have happened. In the late 1920s, BP is then about 70. He had a series of dreams, and he was advised to keep a note of these dreams, which he duly did. And these were subsequently analysed by a psychiatrist, who from that diagnosed that he was a repressed homosexual.
Okay.
If I could come in there, Justin, this psychiatrist was a Harley Street doctor. Psychiatry hadn't really been invented. The leader of psychiatry was Sigmund Freud. Freudian psychology, psychoanalytics was based on the presumption that everything is sexually motivated, and it's now largely discredited. However, the people who formulated these allegations haven't gone that deep. They're just referring to a document that Baden-Powell wrote in the late 20s, which simply explained the reasons why homosexuals could not be allowed to be Scouters. And Miss Drew quotes that as evidence of his homophobia. She apparently doesn't know the laws of the land, because in 1920 it was illegal.
It was illegal.
I think that act was not repealed until 1968, Paul?
Yes, thereabouts.
Yeah,
yes.
Thereabouts. So it's just, we don't need to spend time on arguing that. It was against the law.
Can I come in, Colin, to complete my side of the story of the evidence against BP being a repressed homosexual? During my time as archivist, a lady came to see me who I'd never met before, and she was a fairly eminent, an expert in graphology, the study of people's handwriting. And she was trying to make studies of the handwriting of various famous people. And she latched on to an idea of doing a study of BP's handwriting. She came to see me. It was clear from having chatted with her, she had no preconceived notions about the background of the man. So she spent a day with me studying pieces of his handwriting and measuring and making notes and all sorts of clever things. And several weeks later, sent me a 7-page document, which was a sort of a psychiatric profile of the man, built up as on the basis of her study of his handwriting. 7 pages of it. It's still in the association's archives. And she, without me even prompting her to make any reference to this, she says in this document quite clearly, this man is heterosexual.
Right. Okay. That's just fascinating. Just looking at someone's handwriting and studying it. We're getting some great questions in here. Hello to Amber Wiley. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname correct there, Amber. Greetings from Baden-Powell Scouts in the US. Outside of specifics about BP and specific individuals, what can you say about his position in the larger systems of his time? Imperialism, colonialism, segregation, and the lasting impact of these. Also, why did it take so long between his passing and erection of the statue in Poole? Well, let's address the last question. Why did it take so long for the erection of a statue in Poole? I guess it was just 2008. It was Paul. It was to mark the centenary.
It was to mark the centenary. Of course, there have been for much earlier than that, a statue of BP on Brownsea Island itself. Mm-hmm. And there's been the very large granite statue of him outside BadenPowell House in London. There was nothing actually in Poole and the local scout authorities in Poole thought, let's try and raise some money, erect a statue to mark the centenary of scouting.
I think just in the Scout Association, some people would say quite rightly, have always tried to concentrate their spending on providing a program for the youngsters of that day. Yes. And statues came perhaps a fair way down the kicking order, such that, as we've heard, the statue in Poole was mainly the work of one scouter, but contributed by the whole community. But if our listener there is using the word statue as a means of saying, well, why did it take so long for Baden-Powell's fame to result in something of note, some form of commemoration? I'd just like to throw in the fact that perhaps Baden-Powell, other than royals of whatever nation, is the most featured man on the postage stamps of the world. So perhaps he wasn't marked always in a piece of rock, but his fame, you'll find it in every stamp album in the world, because every country has stamps of Baden-Powell.
Well, Colin, I think this is a topic for another show, where I'm going to ask you to go off and research how many different name signs, streets, roads across the world are known as Baden-Powell Street and Baden-Powell Way, or something related to Baden-Powell.
Indeed.
Continue on.
There's even a couple of schools.
Yeah. A couple of schools, of course. I forgot about that, Paul. There is. Amber says, in the US, it's very clear, for example, in the South, that statues of Civil War leaders of the South pro-slavery were erected 50 plus years after the Civil War, very clearly to defend the values of segregationalists, that's a hard word to say, and to keep black people in their place. What drove the erection of the statue of BP 67 years after his death? Well, I think we've addressed that. It was made for the centenary year of scouting. Okay, we're not going to go into the question of 2007 or 2008 tonight, Colin. That's a matter for another day. Living in North Yorkshire, where the BP bust at Catterick, have any others in the UK become a focus in the same way as the Brown Sea one? Well, we addressed that earlier. That comes in from Stuart. We addressed that earlier, that there's a statue that's destroyed, Stuart, in Portugal after all these issues that's happened down at Brownsea. Now, I'm going to go around the panel here, and one of the things that came up, Chris and Matt, was the fact of, okay, well, if we remove it, why don't we just you found out within those 24 hours of being down at Poole and at Browns, or at Poole Dorset and at BP statue, that there was empty buildings, and some local councillors were saying, okay, well, the empty buildings could be made a museum. Could that be an option for the future? Like, I know that there's always been talks on the horizon. Even Paul probably will say it's been a long time coming request to make a museum at Gilwell. Would Poole Dorset be a better place to have a museum?
Well, there was certainly certainly up to 2008. I'm not quite sure how much past 2008. There was a museum called the Waterfront Museum in Poole.
Okay.
A whole floor was given over to scouting and its history. I think that museum has closed, probably for financial reasons, cutbacks one way or the other during the austerity times we've all gone through. I wouldn't be keen on that statue going back into a museum. Museum means running costs.
Yes.
At the moment in time, I don't think the good burghers, the good folk of Poole, can afford to run a museum.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, just in the self-same museum that Paul is talking about, for at least 2 years, held jam roll. Jam roll was in the Poole.
Okay.
Baden-Powell's iconic Rolls Royce was in that museum for a period of time.
I think it's just a matter of fact that you get so many tourists to Poole, so many scout groups to Poole. Is there room for Is there room for a museum, or as Paul mentions, the running costs? Chris, Matt, would you like to see a museum in Poole?
Yeah, I think so, because there'd be quite a lot of people go down there, and I know there's several scout groups around Poole as well. One of the things that I'll just take up on was you said about moving the statue. All the locals that were there, not one of them wanted that statue moved, because they said if it's moved, it'll never go back. Mm-hmm. We didn't want to see it move, but I didn't want to see a bunch of idiots trying to throw it into the sea either. So it was quite like I was asked about what would I do, and I said, well, I can't tell you what I would do, but the council are in a very difficult position, because you either you know, if they don't move it, some idiot could drag it into the harbour, but if they do move it to keep it safe, the locals didn't like it, so they were, you know, it's quite understandable for them. It's a very difficult position, but I think they made the right choice by boxing it. But I think, you know, at some stage that's all got to come off, and I'm sure they'll have a mad influx of people going to see it again.
Well, and that actually brought up one of the questions someone has just thrown up. When are they going to unbox this? We haven't been told that. No.
No.
Well, there are two options, aren't there? It's either unboxed or it's moved, and I suspect that when either of those happens, there'll be another wave of interest by the media. But going back to your question about museums, I've been very fortunate enough in my scouting life to have travelled extensively and given scouting talks all over the world. As we know, our country is very fortunate to be the home of scouting. There are numerous countries in the world that I've visited with populations of less than 6 million that have more than one scout museum. I know it's been a cherished ambition of a lot of people in scouting that we should have what in today's language is a heritage centre, and there are plans well afoot to have a heritage centre in Gilwell Park, but we're now in a very different landscape.
Yes.
I would say that any proposals to have a scouting museum anywhere should be investigated and costed. If a council are offering a building, then that means that's a lot less money than trying to build one. And maybe it could be a temporary structure until the Scouting Heritage Centre is built at Gilwell Park. But we have gone now, since 1907 at Brownsea Island, we've gone a lot of years without a proper scouting museum. And every other country in the world, nearly very tiny little countries, have got scout museums. And we have got an excellent scout museum in this country, run by an enthusiast up in Lancashire, which shows what can be done if there is a will.
Yes.
Is that independently ran, Colin?
It is indeed. Yes.
Wow.
Michael Looms, the Wadika Scout Museum. If our listeners haven't been, it is a place to go.
Peter,
you can find it on the internet.
Peter Millward sent in, we were just commenting earlier about the Baden-Powell Street in Nottingham. Thank you for that, Peter. And he also asked, is there a museum of any sort in Poole, yet alone the BP one? Well, we mentioned that there was one at one stage. Paul, you think it might not still be there?
I don't think it's that. However, back in the 1990s, during my time as archivist, there were some quite serious plans and discussions to establish a National Scout Museum in Poole. But for various reasons, which I can't go into at the moment, the decision of the association was changed because the association wanted to do its own thing at Gilwell.
Okay. Now, we're going to just address the last, two or three allegations. We sort of did address the Mafeking and the Boer War one, Colin, but Baden-Powell was a fascist because he supported Mussolini. Did he support Mussolini?
Not well. You perhaps be surprised to hear me say yes. He did support Mussolini.
Okay. Don't ruin the program.
but it's all a question of when and for how long. Baden-Powell, like a lot of people in this country, thought Mussolini had rescued his country from communism, and BP was violently opposed. I say violently, he wasn't a man of violence, although he was a soldier, I suppose. He was definitely against communism. And so BP thought, like a lot of people, that Mussolini had rescued his country from communism. And then later on, Mussolini absorbed the Boy Scouts of Italy into a new movement that he'd set up, a new youth movement called the Balia. And Baden-Powell was misled into thinking that this was run along the principles of scouting. Both the Hitler Youth and the Balia were travesties of scouting. But Baden-Powell didn't know this at the time. And he was further interested in Mussolini because Mussolini put the Balia into schools and made it part of the curriculum, which happens today in Thailand and several other countries. Yeah. However, when Baden-Powell found out that it was nothing more than a fascist youth organization, he dropped it like a proverbial hot brick. And the proof of that is contained in a letter which I have, where the second, I think it was, peace cruise, because Baden-Powell and his wife set up a series of 3 peace cruises in the 1930s, where they were given a ship by the White Star Line, packed it full of scouters and guiders, and went off to various parts of the world in the cruise ship, calling at each place, and the job was to promote peace, which they did excellently. Now, the cruise of the Calgaric was due to tour the Mediterranean. The plans were that it would call at Italy. It got as far as Nice, which is only about 10 miles from Italy. It traveled down the coastline of Italy. It never called, but the original plans were that it should. The letter says, we are not going to Italy. Baden-Powell does not agree with fascism and he isn't going to support it in any which way. So yes, he did initially, but the whole thing that's happening in this travesty that's going on seems to be the belief that you can take a view that a man had for 6 months or a year and call that his lifetime's vision against what he actually achieved in his life. Yes, he was fascinated by Mussolini for a couple of years until he had demonstrated to him that it was a fascist youth movement, and from then on it was dropped like a hot brick.
There was no slavery or any connections of slavery during the Boer War, were there, Colin?
The Boer War was I think, should be context by the fact that it was fought against the Boers. And the Boers were a group of people from lowland Germany and Holland. They arrived in South Africa much the same time as we did. They did not ban slavery like we did. And one of the reasons why they went on the Great Trek was to get away from British jurisdiction in Cape Town so that they could carry on doing what they liked doing. So their treatment of the blacks during the Boer War was different to that of Baden-Powell. Baden-Powell worked with a local tribe that was called the Barolong. He had good relations with them. At the end of the Boer War, he actually got a presentation from them. There was actually a very interesting young man called Sol Plaatje, who was one of the only black people ever to make a diary of what happened in the Siege of Mafeking. Sol Plaatje's diary you can find on the internet. You might have to pay about $10 for it, but it's written by a black man, a member of the Barolong tribe, and one of very high standing because he actually became the first secretary of the ANC. He was a court interpreter, and he was somewhat of a fan of Baden-Powell's. And in his diary, he recounts a situation which has been used at various times in the last 100 years to have a go at Baden-Powell. Baden-Powell, the siege was a siege, and the purpose of the Boers was to starve the British out, and they were doing that quite nicely. There was starvation until the Scotsman said in the very north of Scotland, we boil the husks of oats, and we've got plenty of those because we used to have horses before we killed them. So we've got these husks remaining. And you know what? If you boil them for 3 days, you can make porridge out of them. So Baden-Powell set up these kitchens and distribution points to give everybody in Mafeking a quart of sown a day. And that's how they managed to survive the 217-day siege. However, that was for all the black people in Mafeking at the start of the siege. The Boers, who were trying to starve us out, hit on a cunning plan. And that plan was to drive the itinerant peoples who lived on the edge of the Kalahari Desert into Mafeking on a promise of food. The whole purpose was that these natives would strain on our ability to feed them and bring an end to the siege. Baden-Powell, frankly, could not feed them. He was struggling to feed all the people that was there at the start. So by use of a heliograph, he contacted his senior officer of his frontier forces outside Mafeking using a heliograph and arranged to set up a dump, a food dump, and escort these unfortunate latecomers into Mafeking. Refugees were going to be escorted out of Mafeking at night. He warned the leader of the Boers, I think it was Cronje at that time, it might have been Stephen because they were at different times in the siege, and said, these people have had no part in hostilities. Please stand clear because we're going to escort these people out at night. Sol Plaatje, who we've just talked about, was one of the people in charge of this mission. And he writes about it in his book. So this isn't Colin Walker talking. This is a black man, Sol Plaatje, talking. Okay. Right. The Boers, having been made aware of what was happening by Baden-Powell, who was trying to ensure that they got to the food peacefully, fired on the line. They were distributed across the veldt in the four corners of the wind, I think. Sol Plaatje, who was a very colourful writer, wrote. I have read every book there is to read on the Siege of Mafeking. I've written 3 books on the Siege of Mafeking.
Yes, you have.
I have never found any criticism whatsoever, Justin, of the Boers' action in firing on these poor, unfortunate people, but plenty of criticism that Baden-Powell drove them out of Mafeking so that he could feed his own soldiers. If Baden-Powell had capsized, if Baden-Powell had surrendered, the Boers are on record of saying that they would make the streets of Mafeking run red with blood, a direct quote. And their treatment of treating native peoples was barbaric. So there is the facts, there's the justification. Well, that's how our listeners make their own mind up whether Baden-Powell was right or wrong.
We're just coming up to the hour mark of this webinar. And as we said, listeners, if there's anything that we haven't covered, we are happy to address it with Colin Walker. And I'm sure Paul will have an open invitation if he can help out in any way. What's next, guys? Okay, we know that the statue is boarded up. I'm going to first bring it to Chris and Matt. What would you like to see happen next, Chris? Matt?
I think, go on.
Well, it'd be nice to see it unveiled in the near future once again, but until everything's calmed down with the Black Lives Matter, I think it's best to leave it boarded up for the moment for its own protection. But I think there should be one hell of a celebration when it's unboarded.
Yeah. We might take another road trip on that day.
I think so.
Yeah. COVID-19 has passed by at that stage, and we can't. I do admire that some of the residents in the area did have a face mask on Baden-Powell over those 24 hours as well to give him protection of social distancing as well. Paul, what would you like to see happen next, Paul?
I'd like to see the statue unboarded when things calm down. I don't share Colin's view. I think depending on the moment they choose to do it, the media may not notice. The media will have moved on to some other great calamity.
Problem.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think so.
We addressed the museum ends of things. Do you think any other areas are in danger of being destroyed? Since we mentioned streets and we mentioned that there's schools and other statues around the globe, do you think this is going to? Do you think things are going to calm down with this Black Lives Matter? It is important. We'll address it. It is important, but we don't want things taken out of context, and we've addressed for the past 15 minutes why Baden-Powell has no connections with fascism, racism, homophobia.
What I would like to see, Justin, what I would like to see is the Thane Rover Crew and myself we've tried to show the factual arguments. Baden-Powell was a man of his time. The sins of the British Empire are transparent now. You can't go around accusing people of things without facts, and then the truth contradicts them. So that's what we've done. We've also examined the motives of some of the people that have been responsible. We can do no more. Now it's time to move on. The people of scouting is in every country in the world except for a very few former communist countries, and its track record is absolutely phenomenal. I think we've got somewhere in the region of 500 million people have come under the influence of scouting. The fourth Scout Law, written by Baden-Powell, a scout is a brother to every other scout, no matter what country, class or creed they may belong. Those young people have lived their lives to try and attain the standards that Baden-Powell set. This is surely a good thing. These slurs and allegations are undermining the work that can be done if they're accepted. But what I think has to happen now is the scouts of the world have to show by their actions that they, through believing in Baden-Powell's message, can transform the world by inclusivity. We look in Britain, we look at Muslim scout troops, we look in, Paul had an example of how in the Troubles, Catholic and Protestant children in scout troops work together. All over the world, you'll find examples of inclusivity of all classes, all sexes in modern day scouting, which show the lie to the allegations. Now, this is the living proof of Baden-Powell's legacy. Not going back into the long distance past and raking up half-truths and downright lies to undermine the work of the world's biggest peace organization.
That's very true. And some may say, well, was it Baden-Powell's footsteps that other people have made changes to the Scout laws and whatever? Well, Baden-Powell used to say, and I quote always this when there's changes in scouting in the past 100 and how many years now? 110, 15 years? Sorry, I can't count anymore. It's got that out of the night. But it's a movement because it keeps moving forward. That was one of Baden-Powell's quotes. Just have to remind our listeners, Paul Moynihan, former archivist of the Scout Association from 1993 to 2008, and author of the official history of scouting. I have a personal question for you, Paul, sort of non-related to the subject as a Scout archivist, because it's the first time we've actually had you on Scouting Radio. As the former Scout archivist for Scout Association, you've probably toured the world as well, maybe not as much as Colin, but have you ever seen something that has been owned either in private ownership or by another Scout association globally and said to yourself, why isn't this in the archives at Gilwell? Is that, if you could name one thing, what would it be?
Oh, gosh. No, I don't think I have actually. I've admired a lot of things. There are some great American collectors. One who I will name died fairly recently, Ken Kittelberger, had the most superb collection of Baden-Powell memorabilia. About 20 odd years ago, I was involved in trying to, with a company, wanting to manufacture a sort of Toby jug image of Baden-Powell. Mm-hmm. And I was in contact with the then Lord Baden-Powell about this, seeking family support and approval, which he and the family kindly gave. And to cut a long story short, as a result of those conversations with Lord Robert BP, he then sent me, he said, I'm needing to slim down. I need to slim down all this stuff that I've got at home. I will send you some stuff for the collection. And this large box arrived one afternoon at Gilwell, addressed to me. And the more I dug down into this box, the better and better it got, until I got to the very bottom of this box and found a blue cloth bag with BP's initials sewn onto them. And inside that bag was A, his silver wolf.
Wow.
B, his bronze wolf, i.e. bronze wolf number 1, and C, his wood badge beads. And I said at that moment, I said, there's nothing more important out there than this.
And that's now in Gilwell.
That's now a Gilwell. It's now a Gilwell. Yeah. What I would like to find, but I don't think it exists, the association possesses about 1/3 of the original manuscript of Scouting for Boys. Whatever happened to the remaining 2/3 of that manuscript, I'd love to know.
Wow. Yeah. And maybe that is in private ownership. Actually, one that I've asked Colin about in previous shows is there was someone that was trying to sell Baden-Powell's hat on eBay, and it was going for a phenomenal amount of money. Truth or fiction on that, Paul? Was that the real hat of Baden-Powell, do you think?
That was a hat that Baden-Powell, a Stetson, American cowboy, American maker of cowboy hats, John Stetson, I think his name was, who was franchised to be able to make the very hat that Baden-Powell wore, which was the Boss of the Plains hat, Boss of the Plains BP, but that hat with the mark on the hat band saying Baden-Powell was franchised and on sale in not Harrods, the other big store. But I'd just like to say about the collecting of artifacts, because you know, Justin, I'm a great collector.
And a private collector as well.
And I have lots of Baden-Powell's letters and some very, very nice things, as do other friends of mine. I'd just like to say this: they are worth nothing unless they are used to promote the image of Scouting and Baden-Powell worldwide. I, as you know, have written 3 books on Scouting collectibles where my collection and that of other people are featured. These things have got lessons they can teach us. If they're objects that don't see the light of day in some sort of archive, no lessons are being learned from them. Nobody is being inspired. You'll know my motto, Justin. Scout history is inspirational. Let's use it to inspire.
And what we have done, some people in the past week asking where can they find more of Colin's materials. Colin is a Scout historian, author of 12 books on Scouting, including 3 on the Siege of Mafeking, which he mentioned earlier, member of the Thane Rover Crew and Lord Baden-Powell's own. And we can find all the history. We host Colin's old Scouting Milestones website on the Scouting Radio website. We are, and you can get that straight by going to history.scoutingradio.com. It will bring you right into that. All the articles that Colin wrote, going back to, I think, 2005 or 2004, you started writing them, Colin.
Yeah.
It's all archived on our website. It's going nowhere. It's free of charge to enter and look at all those things. Some of our listeners have said, can you update some of that material? In time. Colin is more writing the books and getting the books out there for people that don't want to read it online to make hard copies. And as the information has unveiled further and further in the past 15 years that I've known Colin, and what a great man Colin is to have published all this information. He does it. I don't know how, we brought it up several times on the program. I don't know how his wife puts up with him when he when it comes to these type of things. Like my wife Jen actually said that someone has just ruffled Colin's feathers, and rightly so. They did ruffle Colin's feathers, but you can't, for any type of historian who has studied this type of in-depth information on the founder of Scouting or in their subject field. Like, by God, Colin, I'll say it now, if the Open University could give PhDs on a doctorate on on archivedness and knowing about Scout history. There's no better man than Colin Walker to have the information. I really sell that there. Paul, I think you must have helped Colin throughout getting a lot of information to his time as well.
It's been great fun.
It has been great fun. Good. I'm gonna one last comment just by Brian Billington. Not a question, just further information. Anyone interested in Michael Looms Museum at Wadakur Scout Camp, which Colin mentioned, can find details if they search "Story of Scouting Museum." Highly recommended.
Highly recommended.
Yeah. Guys, we're going to leave it there. Colin Walker, thank you so much as always for being part of this program. I think we've addressed so many allegations and made fact of this. We could keep this show going for hours on end, but we have the document. It's a PDF that's signed by Paul. It's signed by Colin. It's signed by the Thane Rover Crew. Chris and Matt, thank you so much for what you guys did, going down and making a statement, traveling the length and breadth of to go down and make a difference, and being seen around the globe. Hopefully, as we mentioned, if you want to support getting the statue of BP repaired in Portugal, Karuna badges, we will have the link on the Scouting Radio website. All the proceeds are going, and you can make donations towards getting this statue repaired. Once we see that repaired, I think that's going to be a statement as well. I think that's the way we. But for those who have joined us, there's over 30 people in attendees, and for people that will listen to this program afterwards, if you have any questions whatsoever on Baden-Powell and the history of Scouting, please contact us at Scouting Radio. We'll pass it on to Colin and we'll pass it on to Paul. But we'll leave it there, guys, and thank you so much for what you've done.